Hello and welcome to this special prom with the new Queen's Hall Orchestra recreating the opening concert of a century ago. Actually, of course, it's no such thing. It wasn't at the Albert Hall. It was a different kind of program, much longer than anybody could tolerate nowadays.
That makes sense.
After all, we've changed, and the Proms have changed since that first concert conducted by Henry Wood in the Queen's Hall at the top of Regent Street.
It's a long way back to the 10th of August, 1895, but it's a day that always remains in my memory. I started off from my home in Camden Road. We took a 2-horse bus to Oxford Circus and got to the hall early, and meanwhile I could see Henry Wood just behind the curtain with his watch in his hand. Punctually, on the stroke of 8, he walked quickly to the rostrum, buttonhole and all, and the concert began with God Save the Queen, as it was then, followed by Wagner's overture, Rienzi.
The prom concert started obviously 100 years ago tonight, and the orchestra that sat on the platform then is more or less identical to the sort of orchestra that is playing this evening. And the balance and the colours are virtually the same as those that you would have heard had you been lucky enough to have been in the Queen's Hall in 1895.
This year sees the centenary of the cinema as well as the centenary of the Proms. It was a typical imaginative idea about making a new audience in a new way. Wood, right from the very start, was not the bandmaster doing popular concerts, but somebody who really introduced new music on a huge scale. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of first performances, from Mahler's symphonies to Bailey's symphonies to Schoenberg's orchestral pieces in the Proms in 1912.
The Proms have made an enormous contribution to music in Britain. After all, when Mendelssohn came here to play to Queen Victoria, he described us as das Land ohne Musik, country without any music. In the 19th century, I suppose this was largely true. We hadn't really had great composers since Purcell.
Right, that's it.
I first went to the Proms when I was still at school.
All those three are done.
I cycled 72 miles to London, and each night for a week used to go to the Proms.
I can't find 6-1. Oh, hang on, no, it's all right, I'm going blind.
You approach the prom season with mixed feelings. You welcome it and you dread it because you know you're going to go, and yet it's a long, hot summer in London, standing. And when you get a season ticket, you feel obliged to go every night. That's the problem. It is a disease. Only a promenader realizes what I'm talking about.
In the Queen's Hall, the original hall for the Proms, and in the Albert Hall, the audience is aware of itself, aware of each other. And because of this additional element of the seats being taken out of the promenade, of the people standing there is a sense of audience involvement, of people being drawn in. At the Proms, you feel part of a community.
It was a strange audience that could cheer itself hoarse at Brahms' first symphony, and in the second half would do the same thing for a very famous baritone of the time. And one of his great pieces was That Fat Little Fellow with His Mammy's Eyes, and that had the same reception as the Brahms symphony. But it was a healthy thing in a way, because the place was always crowded, and it shows the wisdom of Sir Henry.
I first went to the Queen's Hall in 1926 at the age of 18, and it was a Beethoven night, and there was a terrific crowd, and the heat was oppressive. And I'm afraid I fainted before the end of the Eroica Symphony. I was given a good glass of brandy by the attendant. It was a lovely hall, a little like the Albert Hall, but much smaller. It held 2,500. The acoustics were outstandingly good. Someone once said that the hall looked like the bottom half of a violin, which resonates.
We used to play 6 rehearsals a week and 6 concerts. So obviously with concerts of that length, it was never possible to rehearse any piece completely. But the old man, bless his heart, he had a wonderful technique, and that we always managed to start together and finish together and be together in the middle occasionally.
The BBC first became involved in broadcasting the Proms in 1927. Things were in turmoil even then about the financial problems of putting on the concerts. And there were tremendous worries then that broadcasting would kill live music, would certainly kill the audience for the live events. In fact, that didn't happen at all. The audiences increased, if anything. That was in 1927, but the first recording we have of a broadcast Prom dates from 1933. The incredible thing is that it does run so smoothly so much of the time. But once in a while, the nightmare happens and something really goes seriously wrong, I suppose, most memorably in 1981 when John Holmstrom was sitting here and he had the awesome task of filling for half an hour when the piano lift down there finally packed up.
It doesn't seem to be moving, Tom. Is there a problem?
Yeah, one of the relays have tripped.
Now the platform, I must say, looks much as it did when I last looked at it, but may well be that we shall have some music before too long and I shan't actually have to get round to reading you the racing results.
Eventually a call went out for volunteers from the audience and 12 strapping Prommers crawled in underneath the platform and slowly and painstakingly wound the thing up by hand.
Arena to audience. The souvenir shop is open. I think we may need to adjourn to the souvenir shop and I can then describe the contents of that. This hand winching, I gather, hasn't been done since about 1928 or something, and it's not absolutely in the most beautiful, well-oiled condition. Well, there's a burst of applause, but I can't see. No, it is moving. The machine is moving.
I think we even got down to the cricket scores eventually. But he did it with extraordinary skill and wit and charm, and it was a brilliant piece of broadcasting.
I gave my first prom in 1938, and I don't remember anything about it. But you hear the silence. When you hear that kind of silence, you know that they're really listening and they're all with you. So how can you not be moved? You'd have to be a piece of ice not to be moved by that kind of thing.
effects. This is the music they play every night in London, the Symphony of War.
You're listening to Wagner's immortal overture, The Master Singers, played by the BBC Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Sir Adrian Boult. Yes, Richard Wagner, the master musician, was a German, as were Weber and Handel. Bronze busts of them adorned the very walls of their countrymen, the German vandals of this generation sought to destroy. The raiding Huns cared nothing for the hallowed atmosphere of a temple of music. To them, it was just another building marked down for ruthless destruction.
I was coming up to the rehearsal at 10 o'clock, and suddenly we saw smoke. We just saw the outside, and the outside was there. I mean, you could see the outside, but apparently inside was burnt, and I think some of the musicians who'd left their instruments there, they were destroyed.
Once I was on leave and went to the first performance of Vaughan Williams' Fifth Symphony. Of course, the fourth was a fierce symphony, and the fifth, in its Alleluia at the end, was a much more reassuring symphony, especially in wartime. But during the performance, all the alarms went off and nobody took any notice. The orchestra went on playing. Vaughan Williams was conducting himself, and we just sat there and finished the work.
The 10th of August is a big day, isn't it, for the Proms? It's the anniversary of the first Prom. And of course, a big day for me too, because on that day in 1951, I was married. And I was married in the morning, and I had the rehearsal at 12 at the Prom, and then the concert. I had a friend listening, and she said to herself, "I've never heard Moura play so beautifully." And then at the end, they said, "We think the applause is not only because the audience liked Moura Lympany's playing, but they know she got married this morning." So then she said, "Oh, that's why she's playing with more heart than usual."
The reason I wear my red carnation buttonhole is in memory of Sir Malcolm Sargent. Because to me, he was the finest, and I mean the finest, conductor ever to conduct at the Proms. He was brilliant. His choral works were absolutely out of this world.
It all started for me back in Dublin in the late 50s when I was a radio listener to the Proms when Sir Malcolm Sargent reigned. I was totally devoted to him, and indeed every time the Radio Times came out in July, you would have a picture of Sir Malcolm on the front cover.
The It had fallen into this very repetitive pattern of Beethoven on Friday and Wagner on Monday or something. And that was, of course, to become in later years, particularly in the Sargent years, a real albatross around the Proms' neck. What you got was an A to Z of popular music every year. The Beethoven symphonies, the Brahms symphonies, the Tchaikovsky symphonies, the Rachmaninoff concertos, and so on. Nothing wrong with that, because that music wasn't as available as it is now. Making that kind of music available to a wide public was important, but it was terribly unadventurous.
Howard Shelley in Mendelssohn's first piano concerto with the New Queen's Hall Orchestra, conducted by Barry Wordsworth, to bring the first half of this centenary concert to an end. The first symphony performed at the Proms was Schubert's Unfinished, and that begins the second half of tonight's concert.
When William Glock became the controller of music in 1959, the music life in London seemed to be ripe for some kind of renewal. He was determined to let all kinds of new breezes into the Albert Hall. And that he did. And it didn't prevent people from coming. In fact, I think it injected a lot of new life into those programs.
One year we were very fortunate. Leopold Stokowski came. I was interested to see him because, of course, I'd seen the film of Fantasia, and he looked exactly the same, so I wasn't disappointed at all. Could imagine him with Mickey Mouse.
They stand out there for an hour or an hour and a half or even 2 hours. They come in and they stand right through the concert for about 2 hours. When the concert's finished, they're not satisfied. They always want you to play more. They want more music because they have this hunger for music. This is a remarkable audience.
I was always on the lookout for new works, and I went to hear Britain's War Requiem and thought we simply must have this at the Proms. The general object was to extend the repertory both forwards and backwards, so there were 600 years of music by 1969.
When I heard that one work of mine will be performed in the Proms, I said, well, what has to do with it? You know, because I thought Proms like that, the Boston Pops, something like that, you know. I thought it was a kind of popular concerts, summer concerts, so like you have in, I don't know, in Baden-Baden, for instance. When I looked at the program, then I was amazed because I saw it was not at all this kind of thing. To have all this mixture of programs and of performers.
In my mind's eye, classical music was an elite thing that very few rather snobby people did. And basically the Proms made the whole thing feel okay. I didn't feel weird for the fact that here was I in the middle of the 60s with rock and roll coming out of every orifice in my body, developing this obsessive love of classical music. And I felt okay about it. The Albert Hall can seem a sort of great cocoon which excludes the outside world. But some of the great Proms occasions, I think, are when you're reminded that there is a world out there. I remember a night in 1968, very hot evening, the arena absolutely packed. First of two concerts by the Russian State Orchestra with Svetlanov. It was the day after the Russian army had invaded Czechoslovakia. And we were suddenly, with a jerk, reminded of that by shouts from the gallery up on top as the overture started. The extraordinary thing is that that night the concerto was Czech music. It was the cello concerto by Dvorak with a Russian soloist, Mstislav Rostropovich. He certainly wasn't sending coded messages to the audience, but just simply in the way that he played that concerto, you could tell quite clearly what he thought about the invasion of Czechoslovakia, about the rape of Prague.
Good evening. We recorded this week's Omnibus at the Proms last Wednesday night at the Royal Albert Hall. With Britten and Previn conducting a performance of Karloff's Carmina Burana, we knew we were in for a remarkable experience in musical terms. But as things turned out, the occasion was to be an extraordinary one for other reasons too. As many of you will have read or heard, Thomas Allen, who was singing the very important solo baritone part, suddenly became unwell because of the heat, fainted on the platform, and had to be carried off.
It was a very hot August evening in 1974, and I wanted to hear Thomas Allen singing Carmina Burana, which is one of my favourite pieces. We were all enjoying the concert, and the choir and orchestra were playing splendidly. But the baritone soloist suddenly started to falter. He faltered in a second number and eventually collapsed. And a friend of mine turned to me and said, well, look, you know this piece. Why don't you go backstage and see if they've got anybody lined up to take over? Which I duly did. They slung a dinner jacket on me, and I went out, and Maestro Previn, I think, was thinking that I might have come with some bad news, but he saw that I had the score in my hand, and when my turn came, I took over and sang for the rest of the performance. Of course, the applause was absolutely tremendous. It was quite a privilege for me, a youngster, to work with such exalted company.
And a special round for the man who took over. Patrick McCarthy, a baritone who happened to be in the audience tonight.
I think most people in this country probably get their first experience of the Proms through radio and TV, and in fact many of the people who are in the hall for the concerts probably first saw the concerts on television. We're in a van outside the hall and actually see the concert through the eyes of the television cameras, and hopefully the effect in the broadcast out there is a lot calmer than it is in here.
447.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, coming to E.
The fact that television comes is actually a very good thing, and certainly it's increased the Prom's exposure and reputation internationally in a very significant way. And it's good that television is there regularly during the course of the season. It keeps, again, the whole of the British public aware of the importance of the event over those 2 months.
I've been in the BBC Symphony Orchestra now for getting on for 10 years. This is my 10th season of Prom concerts, and I'm the number 3 second violin. The BBC Symphony Orchestra does 14, which is the largest number of promenade concerts than any other orchestra. We try incredibly hard, in spite of the schedule, to make these concerts, every single one of them, special. The more an orchestra plays together, the better it begins to sound. And when we've been working non-stop together for a few weeks, I think we produce some of our best work.
One feels very close to the audience in the Albert Hall, which is an odd thing to say because it's such an enormous place. But I've always had that sense of intimacy and contact with the audience, and I think the orchestra feels the same way. It is, it's actually my favourite concert hall in London by far.
I've always been interested in Indian music, and I've decided to try to bring in every year a non-European music strand of some kind. And in '81 and then again in '83, we put on an all-night prom from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. of Indian rags, played at the time of night for which they were actually written. And to my astonishment, we had an audience of about 3,500, and lots of Asian and Indian faces.
The jazz music, late night concert by Wynton Marsalis, which I went to and which I thought was terrific. That kind of thing, without violating the principle of the Proms, works very well. I sometimes ask myself what Mozart would think, and I think he'd be doing all kinds of lively and unexpected things now himself. And that's what the Proms are about. The Proms are not just about giving you the staple musical works, though I do wish we could go back to those old days of Friday night being Beethoven night.
I remember when the Vienna Philharmonic came, their president, when they got back to Vienna, actually wrote to the Times to say what a fantastic audience this was, and we adored it. And so I think that worldwide the Proms have a wonderful reputation as an exciting place to play, and a responsive audience beyond anything they will have encountered, certainly in Vienna.
Herzlich willkommen in London. Herzlich willkommen zu unserer alljährlichen Übertragung der Last Night of the Proms. In diesem Jahr haben wir hier in London die 100. Saison der Promenadenkonzerte gefeiert. Zur Einführung jetzt also ein bisschen Proms in der Gegenwart und Proms in der Vergangenheit.
Well, quite a lot has changed since the rather refined foot and stick tapping, which I remember from my very first last night at the Queen's Hall way back in the 30s. We've now got really quite an orgy of patriotic community singing and flag waving, the like of which happens on no other occasion, except, of course, imitation last nights elsewhere.
Japanese person's image of this country was very gentle, quiet. Really, all Japanese said, "What? That was a British person?" And then they surprised, and also they enjoyed very much, because Japanese concert situation is still very serious and very quiet.
I wonder what Sir Henry Wood, the founding conductor of the Proms, would think if he could look down on this scene this evening.
The last night of the Proms, I'd never attended until I actually attended it in the hot seat, the very, very hot seat, if you like. And I remember being petrified. I mean, I'd watched it on television sometimes. Although I did, I must say, watch a few videos of previous last nights before I went out there and did it myself.
Playing a solo on the last night of the Proms may look absolutely fabulous to the outside world, but it's given me God knows how many grey hairs. Everybody is, by that stage, pretty well oiled on champagne and all the rest of it. And you've got these 4 or 5 grey-faced, sweating, quivering members of the orchestra just waiting to get it over with because, you know, you've got a camera stuck up your left nostril, and it's distressing. Interruptions to the audience, I'm actually surprised at how little I notice them when I'm actually playing. But watching the video a couple of days later, it got a bit out of hand last year, I think.
I'm quite happy with the last night, provided, in fact, people listen. What I'm not happy with the last night is the increasing ludicrous exhibitionism of people, dressing up in silly clothes and letting off klaxons and hooting and parrots on strings and me, look at me things. And I have to say that television has made it much worse, that the focus of television on that has actually created the problem.
I had this idea. I thought, well, if I'm singing Rule Britannia, the obvious thing to do is to be Britannia. And so I had a lovely sort of creamy white dress made, and I had memorized actually all the verses of the Rule Britannia, but I was feeling a little nervous. So I had this brilliant idea to write the text onto the back of my shield, which I was holding here. I thought, well, I don't really need this text, but just in case, I'll have it there. What I didn't know was the television cameras took shots of this text, and when I went to Berlin and Munich and places like this, people said, "We saw your text on the back of your shield."
I thought it was a bit like the Nuremberg rally, and if you didn't stand up when you were supposed to stand up, you got poked with an umbrella from behind, and I thought, this is not what I've come for at all.
I think I would have to be paid at least £1,000 in unmarked notes to go to the last night of the Proms. The orgy of exhibitionistic chauvinism is disgusting.
I know I'm looking at a form of patriotism which is a century out of its time. On the other hand, that patriotism carries with it an energy which God knows the country needs. And I come away with a sense that energy, properly focused and properly orchestrated, is a very wonderful thing.
We take the proms absolutely for granted in this country, but there is nothing like them anywhere else in the world. A concert series we put on with 70 concerts with over 40 orchestras. I mean, there's nothing like it. Most big cities close down musically in the summer, and London has this festival.
In an age where we tend perhaps to undervalue history and tradition, to be able to have an annual event which takes us back in memory and enables us to be connected with the past, as well as directed towards the future, as well as to be able to enjoy the experience of the moment, is actually very valuable. It's valuable for our social life, it's valuable for our cultural life, it's valuable for our own sense of identity.
The suite from Bizet's Carmen, played by the New Queen's Hall Orchestra, conducted by Barry Wordsworth. What a century of music making was inaugurated by that first concert in 1895.